is Reverend Dee Ledger. I most recently pastored your sister church at Bethesda United Church of Christ. Your former pastor and myself, we left around the same time. In my case, it was time for me to get a long rest. I'm a single mom with 2 twin boys. And you need to know that about me because it influences how I approach things. I'm also a widow, and my most recent, I guess you would say, employ, I've been on the floors of Frederick Hospital as a chaplain. So good morning. I think I've been in this sanctuary maybe once or twice during my 10 years, almost 10 years at Bethesda UCC, and it's so wonderful to be among you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. Would you pray with me as we begin? O Holy One, we have come from our homes and our lives and our week, intentionally to spend time with you today. So may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O Creator, who knows all of our thoughts and who holds us close. And the people said, Amen. Did you know that we have some 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts per day? If you're anything like me, you probably don't remember any of those thoughts, and scientists say that probably 95%, 85 to 95%, they're repetitive thoughts, and sometimes they're not all unique. They are thoughts that can sometimes be intrusive, thoughts that just kind of go on a loop. The numbers can vary, but the substantial number is according, if you're wondering, to the National Science Foundation, where researchers are paid to study such things. Any of you who in this room have tried to capture your thoughts, or at least recognize when you are having them, and to note whether they are intrusive or repetitive or not, will likely now ponder the sheer amount of thoughts that pass through your brain. So you should be a little bit more forgiving of yourselves when you forget something. But here's the thing. With that many thoughts running around our heads and our hearts, can we actually really honestly know at all moments what we're thinking about? Can we perceive the ways in which our thoughts snag, or they preoccupy us, or they lift us up, or they cast us down to despair? Mind you, 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts a day. And with that many thoughts passing through our brains like waves ebbing and flowing, can any one of us truly experience what someone else is thinking, much less understand our own bewildering thoughts? There's a saying that has been around for a long time. You may have heard it. It's been attributed to probably 6 different people at least, but the one that is most prevalent, his name is Frank Outlaw. He says this: watch your thoughts, they become words. Watch your words, they become actions. Watch your actions, they become habit. Watch your habits, they become character. Watch your character, because it becomes your destiny. And similarly, many of our world traditions, our world faith traditions, world philosophies, they all notice that our thoughts can captivate us, unwillingly sometimes, and control our emotions, and control, ultimately, our actions. Confucius has said the more a human being meditates on good thoughts, the better will be his or her world and the world at large. Why am I saying all this? Because our biblical writers, they also took note of how our thoughts can influence our mood, our behavior. In writing to the church of Philippi, this church that was Paul's joy, Paul's crown, those are both wonderful adjectives. I'm not sure I've ever been told that I am someone's joy and crown. If you want to use that on your spouse or partner, you just say, "You are my joy, you are my crown." The Apostle Paul appeared concerned that some of the folks in his beloved community were not of the same kind of mind in the Lord. It's likely Paul was writing to this congregation while he was in Rome in prison. And that would have been probably around AD 61 or 62 for history buffs, that Paul can write a letter speaking of his concern for fellow co-workers in the Lord, I need to say is amazing. Because when we are imprisoned by our own concerns, and I speak of myself here too, we might have understandable difficulty focusing on anyone or anything else than our own circumstance at hand, right? Yeah, but he takes the time to write this church concerning their concerns. And particularly Paul is concerned about Euodia and Syntyche. That's not easy to say those names very fast. They are two women in this community who appear to be in conflict about some matter that's affecting the larger community. But likely, here's the thing, the matter probably was something kind of petty, kind of small, or else Paul would have addressed it doctrinally, but he doesn't. It was the kind of opinionating that can kind of tear at human relationships. In any case, this conflictual relationship has reached the ears of Paul in Rome. And the troublesome thing isn't the actual issue, right? It's not the issue. It's the effect of the conflict on the community. Now, our everyday conflicts, our everyday human conflicts, they can be really tender. They can seem at first to be innocuous until they start to escalate. And then they start to affect our families, our relationships, our communities, our world, our church. Because they start to characterize, we start to characterize or demonize or define each other. Conflicts may at first appear personal, but don't you know they're never personal? Never strictly personal, no. And the way in which we approach or handle conflict affects the entire community. And that's what Paul is addressing. So I'm stinting as a substitute teacher in Montgomery County Public Schools. Can I get an amen? This is after 30 years of not being in a classroom. I am a certified English teacher, but when I show up, I have no idea what subject I'm going to teach for the day. And it's been fairly interesting. It's very similar to showing up at the hospital and entering a room and having no idea what the people in the room are going through. That's actually a good thing not to know until they share, because sometimes what they share is different than what's on the record. So recently, my 6th graders in one of our area schools watched a video on human conflict and the ways in which we human beings typically respond. So I'm going to take you into that 6th grade classroom. You see, we each have a way that we typically respond to conflict. Did you know that? Have you thought about that? Some of us are conflict avoidant. We avoid disagreements at any cost, even if that means burying the issue. Some of us are accommodating to conflict. We mostly go along to get along. I know that expression still exists because I am sometimes an accommodating person. Perhaps we have a particular thought to contribute, but we avoid voicing it in order to keep the peace. And some marriages are like this, some partnerships, one spouse avoids voicing their needs or their perspective over time because the cost, they believe, will be an argument or an escalation. And after so many years, they decide it's just not worth it anymore. But you know, the downside of that is that resentment starts to build because one partner's humanity, fullest humanity, isn't really showing up fully or fully represented. There's another conflict style called a competing style. Some of you may know of this, have seen it, or perhaps you yourselves, this is your style. I want to add, there's nothing really wrong with any one of these styles. They all have their pluses and they all have their minuses. It's how flexible you are. For the competing style folks, arguing and articulating your priorities is going to take precedence, leaving little room for any kind of negotiating. You press your point because you believe that it needs to be pressed. And sometimes it is pressed to the detriment of others. These folks seek to win in every conflict, and they present themselves in a way as to dominate or freeze out other priorities, other concerns, beyond their own. Over time, this style can become isolating and fracture relationships. But the good side of it is that when a decision needs to be made, a decision gets made. Compromising, that's another conflict style. These folks seek to meet people halfway. They are willing to give up some of their priorities in order to seek a resolution where everyone will get some of what they want, but not all. And usually nobody is satisfied. And then lastly, some of us have a collaborating style. And we seek to find a solution that goes beyond our own desires, or everyone's desires for that matter, and priorities for the one solution or two solutions that best fit the situation and all, not simply the ones that are in conflict with one another. But as we know in the congregational world, this takes a lot of time and a lot of long meetings, as well as the motivation to continue to see it through. So, my friends, which conflict style do you tend to gravitate towards? Or is there something altogether different? Avoiding, accommodating, competing, compromising, collaborating? Most of us are a mixture of these things, but depending on the situation, we will often have a style that frequently shows up more than all the others, especially when we are triggered. So we don't know, back to the Bible, what kind of style Euodia and Syntyche had, these two women, but we know that Paul in his letter doesn't take sides. I find that very interesting. He doesn't take sides. He doesn't take sides. He argues that both of these women are to be of the same mind in the Lord. What does that mean? They are not to be united simply thinking the same thing in their thoughts, but they are to be united in the Lord, of the same mind in the Lord. That is, they are to be united in Christ's spirit, united in Christ's way of being in the world, which I will say is many times altogether different than the way you or I sometimes approach things. It means gently setting aside your particular issue and to try to see and listen as Christ would see and listen. Sounds impossible, but we have examples in the Bible of where Christ does this. It requires taking a more transcendent approach, or what is sometimes known as the third way. And so Paul urges the church of Philippi to center themselves fully in Christ so that that community might thrive. And he urges his listeners to help these women. Now, when I read that, I was like, oh no, there's no way I'm getting between, there's no way I'm going to get between two warring sixth graders. There's no way I'm going to get between two warring women of the church, particularly if they're long-standing members, right? But he says that we are to help these women because they are co-workers in the Lord. And he knows that dissension tears at community fabric. So here's the thing. We know that our thoughts often give rise to our emotions. We think that our friend dissed us, took advantage of us, and we may quickly get angry. We might think that they don't care, they're taking us for granted. And so we fume about their rudeness to our friend or our neighbor. We get cut off in traffic. And we think uncharitably that that person is an arrogant blankety blank blank blank. We fume about the child, the adult child, that doesn't call us for weeks. We think they're upset with us, and we approach the next conversation with a bit of wariness and hurt feelings and distrust. And our egos, they constantly get sad and bruised and mad and affirmed and questioned. And then we have all manner of reaction without examining the thought, the precipitating thought itself. And all of this thinking and emotional drama happens really fast. 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts a day. Behind every emotion, my friends, is a story that we are telling ourselves. For instance, instead of saying, I feel angry, naming the emotion, we say a story. He doesn't care about me. He never cared about me. He forgot my anniversary. Why exactly do we do this? Because it's easier to do the story than feel the emotion. Usually we tell ourselves a story from the past or the future, and that makes the emotion rise even more. Remember, we have 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts a day. Have we considered the patterns that those thoughts take? Have we considered the stories behind the thoughts? And isn't it interesting that sometimes it's the same story over and over again? Have we noticed how certain stories are really triggering for us? And some of those stories have existed since our youth. So Paul realizes in this short passage the anxiety and the fear that can drive our behavior. Is anxiety fueling our approach to conflict, our relationships with ourselves or others? For this reason, Paul urges us not to be anxious about anything, to refocus our thoughts on gratitude. It can seem simplistic, but it's really not. If you've ever been really pissed off at somebody and then you try to say, thank you, God, for all the blessings in my life, you probably can't do that in 30 seconds or less. Paul knows that being thankful shifts our thoughts from being anxiety-ridden to the abundance of blessing that we already possess, but have trouble seeing. He says, do not be anxious about anything, but in prayer or supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. When we are afraid, when we are pushed down and concerned about our lives, when we are anxious, we conveniently forget all the times that God has made a way, all the times that we have survived calamity or the chaos of everyday situations, the times that God has helped us to discern next steps. I'm there right now. It is not for nothing that the Bible says over and over and over again, be not afraid. One of the things I learned as a chaplain in this most recent stint, I thought I knew it, but I know it better now, was how our emotions can affect others. how we can learn to regulate emotional intelligence, regulate our emotions by taking time to observe our thoughts before entering a space. And if you are sitting there today on a Sunday morning say, oh my God, sounds like just so much work. I get that. Paul actually says that the peace of God will guard our thoughts and minds in Christ. We don't often think that our thoughts need a guard. At the same time, don't you know, we let in so much information that can foster anxiety and untruth to our detriment. We allow our hearts and minds to be reactive in ways to the latest familial or communal crisis before taking time, before we react, to step back, to listen, and to assess. Something as simple as the way in which we enter a room can affect the energy of the room. How would you gauge the energy of this sanctuary right now? Right? It's different because I'm a new person coming in. And it's different because of what you brought to the space. Scientists have spoken of mirror neurons in the brain that cause feelings of empathy when we see someone in pain, or can contribute to feelings of pleasure when we see someone eating a pleasant meal. Maybe that's why people take so many pictures of their meals on TikTok and Facebook. I don't know. But if we are not aware of how our emotions can affect a space, a public space, or a personal space, if we are not aware of how we can be triggered by the story in our heads, whatever that usually is, or the emotional energy in a room, then we are not able to mindfully regulate our emotions in a meeting, or on the job, or with our loved ones. Paul directs those believers at Philippi to refocus their thoughts. He says that this is a way to redirect and be of the same mind in the Lord. He says whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable. If there is any excellence in these things, anything worthy of praise, then think about those things. So just imagine for a moment if in each situation we were to actually redirect our thoughts to what is honorable, just, pure, pleasing, commendable, excellent, worthy of praise. Because too often we do the opposite. We seek out the dishonorable. We highlight the unjust, and we need to do that, so I'll get to that in a minute. The impure, the displeasing, the uncommendable, and that which is worthy of rebuke. It's not that we shouldn't address the terrible situations politically that we are seeing in the world right now, particularly in Israel and Palestine. It's not that we should not address the unjust conditions of the world. It's that our thoughts and our emotions may not be continually held captive by such things, prey to the whims of the world and the untruths that diminish human thriving. What if we consecrated our thoughts, 12,000 to 60,000 a day? What if we tried to consecrate those in Christ? Do we even believe that we could do that? How might our individual and collective energy change for the better? How might we enter a room? How might we approach our deeply personal internal conflicts? When Paul says, think on these things, he's urging his church companions to pay attention to the patterns of their thought and how they inform their relationships. And if this sounds a little Buddhist to you, Buddhism has this down. The Christian tradition hasn't accentuated it as much. So friends, I would like for you today, right now, to think of a potential or real human conflict that you're in the middle of. Maybe that conflict's with yourself. Maybe it's with a fellow person. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's with your dog, okay? I want you to think of a conflict that you are having What kind of energy are you bringing to that? What kind of story have you created in your head about that? And what kind of conflict style are you usually using in that? And what percentage of those 12,000, we'll use the lower number, thoughts, have been pleasing and honorable, and have you been of the same mind in the Lord? Matthew Shim, as I close, has written, I thought this was really interesting. This comes out of Columbia Theological Seminary. He was writing about emotions and faith, feelings and faith. He says, emotions result from assessments made about the past, the present, and the future. Christianity grounds its believers in a specific past, present, and future. And through the act of baptism, we are incorporated into the story of God, healing actively a fractured world. We no longer see past, present, and future the same way as the world. We no longer need to embrace a narrative that says only the fittest will survive. We no longer need to see our happiness as tied to what gadgets and gizmos we possess. We no longer need to live in denial of the immense suffering and death that pervades human existence, including this past week. We no longer need to look to the future with utter uncertainty, for we know that our story ends with fellowship with God and with the saints. Ultimately, friends, we need to trust. We need to trust that our relationship with Christ can bring us to this more spacious place, a more imaginative way of thinking through our conflicts, of feeling our emotions, and of responding to those things within us and beyond us. So what about you? Are you of the same mind in the Lord? Do you trust that the relationship that you have, whether you started it years ago or you are a new disciple, that relationship can shift the energy of every single place that you go? Whether it's a doctor's office, or it's a church sanctuary, or it's a cafe out here, or it's sitting down with your loved ones. Do you trust that that relationship can shift your emotions and your energy and shift what you were thinking about? May it be so. Amen.